I'm Emma Blaney, so I'm the HR and CSR Director for Your Monitor International, which is the world's leading private market research company. So 1,500 full-time staff based across 15 offices globally. So COVID has been fantastically fun for the HR department for us, and also another 2,000 contractors based in around 200 countries.
Good. I'm going to try and keep still just in case it's me that's crackling. I'm not sure who it is, one of us. So the broad topic we wanted to have for this panel session, excuse you guys behind us, I just realised you're behind. We've talked about it through a number of the sessions today. There's been a huge change in leadership styles and leadership requirements over the last 18 months. So what we just wanted to talk about was how the world of work in terms of leadership has changed over that 18 months, the skills that are required, what changes organisations have had to make when considering the new social and moral responsibilities, which again seem to have come to the fore as we discussed earlier. So what impact is ESG having? Are we recruiting for skills or experience in leadership? So just that broader conversation around leadership. And managing remotely is probably the first place to start. And Emma, given that you are the HRD amongst the group, how have you found that in your organisation?
In terms of the managing remote piece, it was very obvious very early on that some managers were finding this really, really difficult. It's a difficult concept as well, because it's very different moving into an environment where suddenly you feel as though you've lost control at a time when you're also needing to be significantly more sympathetic to people's individual circumstances than you would normally need to be. So in terms of the approach which we took, we actually invested very heavily in external training on hybrid management itself, just to try to give our managers the tools to enable them to understand a little bit better, and also giving them the ability to make more decisions themselves. So really kind of empowering them to make decisions which were right for their team. You know, when you're working in a very matrix environment across 15 different countries, actually what was right for our Shanghai office was exceptionally different to what was correct in Sydney or Singapore at the same time. And many of our managers are managing across all of those jurisdictions together. So they were trying to really kind of have a single approach as they normally would in management style. So we had to train them in understanding. It had to be very individual, very unique, very sympathetic to individual need. And I think, you know, kind of building in that kind of investing in that training for all 250 managers globally was fundamental in at least starting those conversations with them. Something that's interesting is when I saw your 4 kind of point grid, Stephen, we actually used something very similar. We're really trying to push to those managers. Let's really try and unpick each of the roles, all the responsibilities, and work out which are critical, which aren't critical, and which can be worked in different styles and in different ways. So
and was that brand new training? So that's literally brand new to that cohort of managers?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely brand new training. We've always kind of considered ourselves to be exceptionally flexible, but that flexibility has been very much around the hours we enable people to work. It hasn't been about remote working. And it was something that none of them had ever been through before. So it was new to every single manager.
And Stephen, has any of your research touched on that around leadership development?
Yeah, I mean, the surveys that we've been doing of people working from home since the beginning of the lockdown, the quality of management's come out as being a really critical feature in affecting important outcomes for individuals. So, for example, those employees who score well on we use the WHO 5 measure of mental well-being in our surveys. The people who scored best on that also reported they had more frequent contact with their manager, that their manager seemed to be understanding their needs and was being more empathetic and flexible and all the things that Cary was talking about. And also, there was a really strong correlation between people who were scoring high on that and people with higher productivity. So you can almost see a direct line of sight between quality of management, mental well-being and productivity. And I thought that was, you know, perhaps you'd expect to see that, but it was good that it was being reinforced. I think the other thing that we also found was that those managers who said that they had received extra support and training from their employer about how to manage remote teams also felt more confident in the way that they were doing that. So there was a clear, again, line of sight between that investment and producing better outcomes. That's not to say they didn't find it challenging. And I think, Cary's caricature earlier about, we only get people into line management jobs because they're good engineers or accountants. I think that still is a problem. But I think there's a recognition amongst managers now, having been through this experience, that you can't do remote management and effective line management without having a high degree of empathy and flexibility, cognitive flexibility, in understanding that a command and control approach is not going to work. We know over many years of research that the best approach to managing in a high performance organization is to secure resources for your people, make sure they're clear about what's expected of them, and then really back off and trust them to get on with things. And that's been amplified in the way that good organizations have managed people remotely.
And Cary, in terms of your work, have you seen, you probably talk to more leaders than any of us, have you seen leaders looking for different things out of their senior team?
Well, during the pandemic, there's something interesting happened. I was involved with a global company doing a survey across a number of countries. And one thing we found, we were looking at intention to leave and during the pandemic and what were people experiencing about the pandemic. And the people, it was a high proportion of people, not who were going to leave, but were thinking about leaving. Yeah. And when they were thinking about leaving during the pandemic or subsequent to, when they get back to the workplace fully and everything else, the key factor was how they were managed during it. That was the key predictor of it. And bad management, and like we talked about earlier, the more empathetic and so on, the more the line manager during the pandemic called people up and did one-to-ones with them and nothing to do with work. So they had their team meetings. The ones that seemed to do the best job and that had less of an intention to leave were those that would call up Fred and say, Fred, I know, how you feeling? Because they noticed in the meeting that they had, even though it was virtual, that Fred, who normally is involved, extrovert, was very withdrawn. See, that's what empathy and emotional intelligence is all about. And those people who had it would call up Fred and say a day later, so, how you doing, Fred? Did you watch a football game? I mean, not Fred, I noticed you were, looking depressed, but using their skills to get Fred to talk about what was going on. And I think that highlighted for me this global, by the way, it wasn't just in the UK, this was a global survey. Yeah. And so it highlighted for me the real significance of the issue of leadership. And for recruitment places like you guys and all recruiters in the future, and people in HR who are internally promoting people to management jobs, really have to take this into account in the future, because if the hybrid model is here to stay, which I think it is, then how are you going to manage remote teams? How are you going to know they don't have they have manageable workloads? Really, how do you know they're not, don't have problems? Yeah. Mental health is a big problem. So for me, that's going to be the big issue.
Yeah.
Go on, no, Emma, go.
So it's quite interesting leading that. This an error which we definitely made was we absolutely were very clear with our managers straight away the importance of having lots of one-to-ones, spending a little bit of time saying how are you, all of those things, and that worked exceptionally well. And all of our employees towards the lower end of our hierarchy felt exceptionally well supported. The error we made is we forgot the pressure that was putting on our managers. And at month 3, we suddenly had some line managers who were utterly exhausted because they were looking at their diaries and they were saying, all that I'm doing all day, every day is going from Teams call to Teams call, no matter how amazing Teams is. It was back to back
Teams, Joel,
Teams call.
We do like Teams.
And our error was we forgot the additional pressure which we were putting onto those middle managers, and they were utterly exhausted. So we actually had to quite quickly put in place things like Meeting Free Friday, which I hasten to add is probably one of the biggest benefits we have ever given our management teams. You are prohibited from any internal meetings on a Friday. It is amazing to wake up on Friday morning and plan your day.
I should maybe make a note of that. Sorry, team, is in the room.
Have a meeting about it.
Maybe tomorrow.
A Teams meeting, a Zoom them out more.
But it was really hard. And
this is a very important point. The point we concentrated on the people, the direct reports, And we didn't, I don't think HR or anybody concentrated on what's the manager feeling about having to go, because the encouragement was to do one-to-ones, wasn't it? The encouragement was, don't just have your team meeting, do one-to-ones, because make sure that they're okay. Okay, fine. And now some people found that really difficult to do, right? And they needed help. And they had so much of that on them, on top of doing their day job, and top of having the other meetings, and top of all of us being bloody zoomed out to death. And it would have been nice if we'd have concentrated a bit on the line manager to find out what he or she was thinking about.
And actually, in the book, there's a section called the squeeze middle, which talks exactly about the multiple pressures from different directions that managers face. I was involved in a study in an Australian bank where 37% of middle managers had undiagnosed depression. And they go under the radar because once you get to a certain point in the hierarchy, you're expected to be bulletproof and very resilient and able to cope with pretty much everything that's thrown at you. And actually, you don't admit you've got a problem, because there's still, in some organisations, a pervasive culture that says once you start admitting that you've got a problem, then you're seen as flaky or unreliable, and someone who can't be trusted to build, to have a bigger job.
And I do think as well, our senior managers are spending a lot of time with the middle managers asking how their teams were.
Yes,
They weren't actually saying, how are you? They were saying, how's your team? How many times have you connected with your team?
That's right.
And it's why that group of middle managers were certainly the ones which we suddenly realised we hadn't given the care and attention to, and everything was landing on them. They were the ones that were picking up the fact that, we said to people who had school-aged children when the schools were closed that they only had to work half the capacity, and they could choose when they were working. We only expected them to deliver half. What we forgot about was we didn't say the same to the managers of those teams. We kind of said, well, your team needs to deliver.
And what was meeting free Friday? I mean, presumably there are other interventions as well, were there?
Absolutely. So we have reduced our core hours to 11 till 3. So you only need to work between 11 and 3. You can space out all of your hours at any other time which is suitable for you. We have meeting free Fridays, which is just, don't underestimate how powerful meeting free Fridays. We have a policy where you can work from anywhere, because as some of our Asian offices started to open up, we found that lots of people hadn't been able to connect with family and friends. So we put in place a policy where people could work from overseas locations for a number of days a year, because we were finding that one of the reasons why employees in places such as Singapore were looking to leave is because of the restrictions of travel and wanting to go home. So we were thinking, well, instead of leaving, you can work there for an agreed amount of time and come back, just to try and retain good talent.
I think, Joel, some of those sound familiar. I think Microsoft had done some of those things around that middle management group and management support.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, touching on the notion of surveys and feedback, again, Microsoft, there's been so many surveys you wouldn't believe over the past 24 months.
Too many?
Possibly. Possibly, but no, I think it's obviously all for the good, because obviously we want to know how people are feeling, inclusive of middle managers at the end of the day, and that goes back up the food chain. And then obviously we make adjustments in the way that we train and bring new resources to those teams, and of course the tools that we use, and of course the hours where we're meeting, and so on and so forth.
And Stephen, coming back to you, I'm going to ask you the forward-looking question as the man who has the most statistics at his fingertips. If you're thinking about succession planning and aligning leadership skills to strategy going out into sort of 3 to 5 years, what do you see changing? Because we talked about some slightly different skill sets which have been necessary through the recession. Do you see those persisting?
I think so. I mean, I think it has shone a light on the need to have a people orientation, even if you are, a finance director or a marketeer. I mean, Cary and I have had lots of conversations over the years about, the content of MBA programs, for example, and essentially, I was on a call the other day when someone said to me, how many people who do MBAs are taught about well-being? I said, well, to be honest, most of them aren't taught about human resource management or people management. It's seen as still as a relatively low priority discipline. It's all about financial management and marketing and all those good things, about how to analyze markets and so all that sort of stuff. So I think in the future, you really can't be a manager in an organisation without paying some attention to and attaching importance to, as an individual, those people management skills. And I think the other thing is that managers will have to have a better developed sense of is seeing patterns, identifying, joining the dots on things that are happening both externally in the labour market and in the workforce and in the wider economy, and what they're doing internally. At the moment, too many of the people I talk to in organisations are focused on what they're doing in their business only, and they're not really lifting their head above the horizon to do any horizon scanning and monitoring about what's going on. And I think actually you can't afford not to do that in a very rapidly changing world. And I think those two things are the things I think that will need to be given more priority.
Cary? Steve said something really interesting about.
Go on, at last.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. He said something.
Make
really...
a note of the time. What do you got that, Amelia?
Well, I mean, I'm in a business school, one of the top business schools in the world. Guess what? Neither my business school nor do any of the other business schools in the UK or the US or anywhere, that 99% of them do cognitive input on their MBA students. They teach them about economics, HR, organization behavior, finance and accounting, right? All cognitive. Then this person who's now 28, so they're the average, say, MBA student, he does an undergraduate degree, then he or she goes and work for 6 or 7 years. Then they come back and they do an MBA, okay? And no matter what they did, if they did a management undergraduate degree even, and they come back, and if you were to put any of those in a group to manage a group of people, you'd be crazy. Because you know what we haven't done? We haven't made it personal. It's your behavior. And strangely enough, when I'm this old, that in the 1960s and 70s, when I came over to Britain at the end of the 60s, 70s, we had something called T-group training. You probably don't know it. Now, T-group training used to take groups of managers away for a week in a hotel, and they'd stay in a group, and they'd look at their own behavior with people who were effectively therapists to look at their behavior, because the view in the 70s and the 60s in business schools, funny enough, was that what you have to do is you have to manage human beings. Therefore, you have to know about yourself. We don't do that now. So everything is cognitive. Now, what the business schools will say, by the way, I brought business school deans together with Dame Carol Black in the Department of Work and Pensions to talk about this issue. Why aren't we developing them personally, develop their personal skills, find out how people actually perceive you in your role, right? And the business schools all admitted they don't do that. But you know what they'll say? Their response is, but that's what business does. They should be doing that. Well, business doesn't do it either. So where are you learning about yourself vis-a-vis other people? Somebody said at this table, I think somebody said that managers think they're good at what they do. Or somebody, maybe it was, I can't remember where it was. They think, oh, I'm a great people manager. And the woman said, he's absolutely crap. I mean, he's not good. And, but he thinks he is. Well, that's what you have to learn about yourself. Until we do this experiential training, and at business schools, by the way, but also in companies to develop people so they know more about themselves, that's how they develop empathy and social interpersonal skills. And we haven't done that enough. So leadership is also about learning about you. How do people really see me?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, two things. One is there's way too many of my team in this room for me to feel comfortable with you repeating that.
You're in trouble, Peter.
Yeah, it would seem so. How do we then find the leaders of the future with the right skills? I mean, Emma, what's your Euromonitor doing?
In terms of the way that we're changing our approach pragmatically, actually, is we're now starting to recruit and promote against our values rather against anything else. So we're actually recruiting and promoting now against things like integrity, curiosity, how good you are at empowering other people to do things. Diversity is now one of our core values, and we're talking about diversity in terms of being open to the views of everybody and the widest view possible, because we understand that for functional skills, we can test functional skills, and that's pretty straightforward. But actually for more senior roles, for leadership roles, it's all about behaviour. And when you spoke about kind of the succession planning piece, we're not even trying to predict what roles we will have in the next 3 to 5 years, because we don't know. However, we know who we believe has the potential to progress because of their behaviours around our values, how they behave at work. And just, that kind of integrity piece is absolutely fundamental, because people will come with you if they are confident in you, they believe in you, they believe that you're actually being transparent and being honest with them. And those skills will come with you regardless of the roles the business needs of you, because they're much more inherent. So we're really changing a lot of our recruitment strategy to recruit really predominantly against the values of our business, because we know we can train people who have the right attitude and who are behaving in the way that we want them to behave. It's far more difficult to bring in a technical expert and convert them into your culture.
Values and behaviours recruitment rather than skills for leadership.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously minimum level skills for certain functional roles, but in the main, it's about behaviours and values.
And how new is that, Cary? Because you've probably seen this in lots of different places.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking, it's something that happened to me a while ago, pre-COVID this happened. And, you know, looking at how do we get these skills, how do we know about, you know, you're talking about values and things like that, which I think are really important. And I remember once I was in an interview, and the interview wasn't going well. It was a group interview with a particular candidate. Okay, so there were 3 of us interviewing this person, and it was kind of a dysfunctional interview. And I felt that all of a sudden I wasn't interviewing. I became my occupational psychologist. I became a psychologist because I was worried. And I thought to myself, I'm not learning about this person, and there's a little bit of hostility toward him. And I then said something I never have done before. I said, the question I had to the candidate was, what do you think's going on right here, right now? I don't know what made me do that. Maybe it's from my old T group days. But I said, because I was unhappy about what was going on, actually. I felt somebody was getting at this particular person. And it was interesting because I found out more from that response, I think we all did, than anything. And this candidate was actually very good and said, well, I feel a lot of tension in you, in the 3 of you. It was interesting. And I thought, wow. Maybe I should be doing this more. I've never done it again, by the way. But the point I'm trying to make is, how do I get at that? How do I get at this person's ability to see what's going on between people? And I think if the more sensitive they would be, the more I think it would be better, as long as they have the technical skills. They do have to have the technical skills.
But you can test technical skills so easily in many other ways.
Yeah, we have to do. We have to find values is very important, because I think that's important. But you have.
I think what's happening. I mean, your point about mapping people against a sort of general set of values and attributes, because you can't predict what the job that they might be doing in 3 or 4 years' time might be, is absolutely the way to go. And actually, some of the smart organisations, multinationals, have been doing this. I did a lot of work a few years ago with BP, and they have a way of sort of mapping out people's potential career paths. You know, you probably can't be in a very senior management job unless you run a refinery in Malaysia or something, you know, that sort of thing. But I think the idea that you can very precisely fit a person to the demands of a job that you don't really know whether it's going to exist or not is just sort of pie in the sky. So actually thinking about generic attributes that align with values is important. But I think the other thing is that being brave enough to say, we value this person because they're absolutely brilliant technically, so we should keep them the hell away from managing.
Exactly.
And we shouldn't penalise them in the grading system or the job evaluation system. We should have a way of attaching a value to their contribution, which means they don't have to be encumbered by managing people.
But Steve, to do that, if we have a pyramidal system like this, to get the status and more money, you have to climb the greasy pole. Right? It's like that. If we had it as a square, where people could go up the system, because you're a great classroom teacher, you might be an absolutely disaster as a head teacher, as a management role. But why can't we pay the teacher who's really good and find ways of determining that a high wage, almost that of a head teacher, some of them. I'm just trying to rethink it, but if we have the pyramidal system, people will go for senior management jobs, because it's higher status, it's more money, even if they're not competent to do it.
Do you see organisations that do that well?
I don't know any organisation that does it well, frankly.
No.
But I think the problem
Stephen?
is,
I think so, there are bits of the civil service that do it well. I think they realise that in some areas they do need technical experts, and they have parallel career paths, and those are reflected in the pay system and so on, and they don't have to take on board people.
You're right. I know one, a law firm. I had to do the judge of the Bar Association and the Law Society had the well-being. Companies would, legal firms and barrister firms would have to would put forward their well-being strategy. And I was one of the judges with a judge from the Law Society and the Bar Association. And all of them were doing things like we do mindfulness at lunch and all that kind of stuff. The typical, they were dead uninteresting. And we all thought that. But one firm said, they asked their employees what they wanted. And the employees said, well, we don't want the structure in a law firm. It's associate, partner, equity partner. It's real hierarchy. Anybody who works at a law firm knows that, right? And do you know what they did, this law firm? They listened to it. And what the employees said, all the lawyers, a big firm, said, we don't want fees, objectives for our fees, like we have to earn a certain amount of fee hours in.
Yeah.
We don't want the hierarchy. We don't want the associate, We want to work and make more money. The longer we work, we make more money. The more hours we decide to put in. And if we want to be workaholics, fine. But if you don't want to, you don't do it. And guess what? They did it. And then they followed it through for the next, profound change. With one person at the top who helped administer the whole thing, but not a hierarchy. And I thought, God, this is so, it shocked us all to see it. But I'm not saying everybody should do that. But what I'm saying is that we're looking carefully at the way they develop their talent and use them in the most appropriate way. Because some lawyers didn't want to become an equity partner.
Yeah.
Because they had a family and they wanted to, you know what law is. Law is 70, 80 hours a week, 90 hours a week. So I thought that was quite interesting.
And Joel, in Microsoft, the functional experts in Microsoft, how does that work as a twin track versus line people managers?
Yeah, I'm not going to say that IT does it perfectly, but at the end of the day, I think Apple in the early 2000s, they started to coin the term evangelist, which, as you've alluded to, if you're very good at your job, the next step should be management or director, mindset-wise. But other organisations like your Apples, like your Googles, like your Microsoft, we started to coin the term evangelist, and in fact, they could be even seen as even more senior than their own manager, because they know that's they have that subject matter expertise and they know that topic inside out. So again, I feel like there's the potential for a lot more change within IT than maybe other organisations. I'm not too sure.
Yeah, and it also feels from some of the stuff we've worked with you guys on that you do hire very much for values over skills in a lot of cases.
Yeah, again, you could have the greatest solution architect on earth, but if they act as a lone wolf, they're not collaborative, they don't believe in that culture and the values, they're not really going to evolve and they're not really going to bring much to us and we're not going to bring much to them. So absolutely, if you believe in that culture and that vision, then we can teach you and hopefully you can teach us a lot of stuff as well.
Have we got any questions in the room? I think the last session we didn't quite leave enough time. We've got any questions? Any hands up? And I think, have you got any questions? If not, we'll go back to me. Richard. Oh, sorry, behind. Did you have a question, Nick? Oh, no, just to Richard.
I'm a non-executive director, so I'm just wondering when the wine starts. I've kind of think I've worked in different organisations because I've seen success come through completely dysfunctional organisations. In fact, most of the organisations I've worked in are complete chaos. And it's sometimes the drive and the challenge and the conflict that comes through that kind of culture that takes a business to different places. And my worry is, and I know you're not saying this, but kind of making it too nice isn't actually always going to get you to the right place. Discuss.
I think it's easy to interpret what we've said as, it being, a Sunday school with lots of hugs and everyone being lovely to each other. I don't think those. I don't think those things are mutually exclusive at all. I mean, a few years ago, I was involved in a big study where we were looking at what are the factors that differentiate between high-performing organisations and the rest. And we did find that being hard-nosed, being transactional, having a laser-like focus on the market and on your customers, bringing good technology to work alongside what you're trying to do. All those things made a difference. But the intangible alchemy that differentiated those at the top and those at the bottom were all the things we've been talking about. organisations had too many meetings, didn't do so well. People who managed by checklist. Managers who were standing over people's shoulders the whole time. All those things, had a damaging impact on performance. This notion of empowerment being something which is, sort of very social workery, is not right. I mean, I think, you can be a really empowering manager, but you can do that because you've set really clear objectives, and people know exactly what is expected of them, and they have the resources to do their job. And that doesn't need, you don't need to be warm and cuddly to do that, but trusting people to get on with it. So you've recruited good people you can trust because they're competent, giving them clarity about what's expected of them, and then just backing off, I think, is the key thing to all this. And you can do that in a very warm and cuddly and empathetic sort of way. I think people like to feel that they're trusted to do their jobs properly, and they're valued for doing so, and they get good feedback on doing it, so it reinforces that behaviour. I understand why you asked the question, but I don't think we're arguing that successful organisations are like Sunday schools. I think you can be really tough and clear. Clarity is what people want.
Cary?
Well, and even if you look cuddly, a lot of the organizations that look cuddly have all these smoothie days, the well-being days and well-being champions all over the place. And do all that stuff is usually covering up something that isn't very effective.
Which is partly why I made my comment about mental health first aid earlier. Yeah. Because to be honest, despite what your PhD student said, the HSE, Nottingham University, a whole bunch of other people have basically looked at mental health first aid.
No, I agree with that.
It's easy.
It's easy.
It doesn't make any difference. People are happy when they come out of the programme, and then 2 weeks later, they're just in the same mess. And I think that the problem about what we're talking about here is you can have all these fruit and Pilates interventions to look after people's well-being, but if they're then going back to jobs that they can't do because they've got heavy workloads, a toxic boss, lots of bullying, and a culture which is lacks trust and transparency, no amount of mental health first aid training or the other things are going to make any difference.
Mindfulness at lunch, I totally agree with that. If you think about all of our careers, we've always had a line manager. It's that person that's the critical one in your job. It could look like chaos around the whole goddamn organization. But if you have a good boss, a boss who manages you by praise and reward and recognizes your good work, who allows you to make mistakes because we all make mistakes, who is aware that you have unmanageable workloads or unrealistic deadlines, or you're suffering, you got a problem at home, right? That kind of person will do the, and if we had a number of those, right, that's what we need. And I remember I got asked a question recently on a big thing I did internationally with a lot of managers. They said, oh God, we've dumped so much on the line manager already. Now you're trying to dump the well-being stuff on this line manager. And my response to that was, if you selected the right person in the first bloody place, you're not doing anything because that's a part of their personality.
Yeah. So Emma, between chaos and Sunday school, where does your organisation sit? I think that's a continuum we've established now.
We can try and monetize that.
I do think there are many senior managers in the business who are pretty frustrated about some of the initiatives, but what you shouldn't underestimate is the war on talent at the moment. We are all going through a very, very small group of talented people who were all born at a time after I was. And actually, what you need to understand is that to be able to attract and retain these people, they have an expectation of being treated this way. So it isn't always about the business saying, well, this is exactly how we feel we should run. This is about saying, we want to capture this group of talent. We want to keep this group of talent engaged. We want to retain them. This is their expectation. And therefore, we need to kind of be bending and moving so that we are their employer of choice. And also, you spoke in your introduction about the immediacy of feedback these days. We all have that kind of glass door image, which has a direct impact on our ability to recruit new talent. So we need to be putting measures in place so that when people are looking at that type of feedback, they're going, this is a really great place to work. Yeah. So it isn't all necessarily about, well, we believe doing these things will have an immediate impact on improving productivity. It's about saying, this is the talent pool which we're trying to target. How are we going to be their employer of choice? What are they expecting from us? And their expectations are pretty different to when I went and got my first job, and what my expectation was of the company I was choosing to work for. And as we become more global in our ability to be employees, that will just continue to become wider and wider. So I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying, and I've had many conversations with senior managers in my business about this is all just going over the top now, this is all becoming slightly out of hand. And it's like, well, we want to attract that group of people, these are their minimum requirements.
But I was talking to an HR director, said exactly that, of a huge global bank. And you know what he said to me? I said, why are you involved in well-being? You never did this stuff before. And he said, you know, everybody's calling the millennials, the snowflake generation. And you know what they mean by that? They mean they'll shift from one job to another. So for example.
Well, they melt under pressure.
No, not quite the opposite. They won't put up with what their parents put up with, which was a crap job. They won't do that. The millennials will go. A student will come back, an MBA student of mine, 29 years of age, comes back in. This didn't happen too long ago, maybe 9. I can't remember because of the pandemic. But anyway, they came back when I was in. It must have been pre-pandemic, and said to me, I said, "You still working for so-and-so?" And he said, "Are you joking? I wouldn't. That's a dreadful organization." He's been in 3 organizations since he's done his MBA. And why? He says, because you know what? I've got talent. I know I'm good at what I do. I don't want to work in that organization. It's bad work. It's not good work. And this is what the guy from the bank was saying to me. And that's it, precisely it. We want to retain and attract the millennials, that generation.
So Emma, what are you currently doing? Are you yet doing anything different to think about when that cohort of talent becomes sort of the next cohort of leaders? Are you thinking about the leadership positions they might take, or is that too far away just yet?
I think it's still very much just trying to model the values and behaviours that we want to drive forwards. I think it is. I mean, and it's very difficult. And also, what we need to remember is that, you know, many years ago, when someone had a bad experience, they could tell 6 people. Now, if someone has a bad experience, they can tell 6 million people very easily. So actually, you know, your reputation, it takes a different battering.
I'm not arguing to create nasty business. That clearly is where we're coming from. But the most untapped resource in business is discretionary effort. And sometimes you need pressure to get that discretionary effort. And most of us did our homework on the bus going to school. Most of us used deadlines to give us that pressure inside of us to do really great work. And I know you're arguing to take that away, but we need to be conscious of the jungle that we're in. You do need people who take a machete and hack their way.
By the way, we're not trying to get rid of pressure, because pressure is stimulating and motivating. The definition of stress is when pressure exceeds your ability to cope.
I agree.
And so, hey, do we want to have people walking in who are extreme, what we call type Bs, who are really totally laid back, highly unmotivated? No, we don't want that. But what we don't want to do is put excessive pressure on them so they don't perform well and they get ill. And for the young people, say, I don't need this, I'm going.
But I think that's also where your reward strategy comes in. You start to identify reward against the behaviours you're trying to encourage. So those people that are doing that extra mile, they are pushing the extra piece, they're rewarded differently. And that means you just have to have a very clear reward strategy. So people that are doing those things benefit from it, and others around them are encouraged to do those things because they can see that benefit. And then by default, looking at the other side, those people that aren't behaving in that way can see they're not being rewarded the same, and therefore are the people that choose to leave. So it's very much driven by reward strategy.
I'll go back to the bond.
I think Tony's got a question.
Thanks, everybody. Has the time come now for big business to learn from sporting management, as sporting management now being the role model in terms of transparency? And they paid their highest players much more than the manager for years and years and years.
That's an interesting one. As long as it's Pep Guardiola, as Man City supporter. Yeah, we don't want to talk about that, do we?
I think that the whole concept of marginal gains from the British cycling team is quite interesting, because that requires you to sort of deconstruct almost everything and then work out which bits of it, if you did a few bits just that tiny bit better. I suppose what I'm not arguing is a return to business process re-engineering. You remember all that, which has caused loads of stress and hassle and so on, and was regarded just as a way of cutting jobs and so on. But actually, if that's done in a more collective way, where actually everybody's got a role to play, it's almost going back to total quality management and the Japanese system. I did a study for Make UK, which used to be the Engineering Employers Federation, looking at sort of high performance work practices in engineering companies, but mostly medium to small companies, and absolutely looking at this thing that Cary was talking about how work pressure in high performance work practices could improve productivity. And we reckon that because everyone's worried about putting too much pressure on people, if they're under pressure in the right circumstances where they have a say in the way things are done, the way the processes are monitored, they can stop the line if they see a problem and all that sort of stuff. Actually, they can sustain high levels of performance under quite significant pressure for much longer. And we calculated that if more organisations in engineering did that, they could probably raise productivity by about 7 to 9%. So I think there are things around the way that you deconstruct business processes, manufacturing systems and so on, and get everyone involved with their ideas to get that built up and to optimise it. I think that is one of the lessons that I would encourage organisations to think about learning from, the way that British cycling has become so successful.
But if you think about Tony's question, it's an interesting question, because what he's effectively saying is, shouldn't we reward the people who actually perform well?
The superstars.
Given in the United States, you can do that. Funny enough, it's got the culture. I mean, for example, there is no safety net there. We don't have things like redundancy pay in the US at all. Zero. You're gone. If you haven't produced, 2 weeks pay, you're off, right? It's a different culture. So they probably could use that system. They're not also constrained by unions as strongly. They don't have very good employment law, et cetera, et cetera. You can see how the US is the way it is, right? They don't protect the individual and everything else. Could you do that in the context of Europe or say the UK? I think it would be very, very difficult to do that. I mean, I want to see a change in that, and to be able to say to a teacher who's really a great classroom teacher, who's produced some great kids, who's really made a difference, not have to go to the management job because she or doesn't want to really do that, or he. Right? I'd like to see us say, yeah, you know what? You're so good, and here's the evidence you're so good, right? In comparison to other people, and we want to pay you more to stay in that. You don't have to become a head teacher, because that's not what you really want to do. I'd love to do that, but I don't know how we would do that, frankly.
It's the public scrutiny as well of the leadership. I mean, I guess the hairdryer days are now dim and distant, because it now be all over social media. And so our sporting organisations now led by the best managers, who realise that if they make any mistakes, then the whole country is going to be debating it the following day.
Maybe Man United need a hairdryer back.
I was going to say, my point was, I could tell the Manchester affiliation from the quotes you two were using. I want to move away from football, you'll all be pleased to know, just for the last 5 or 10 minutes. And I want to come back to you, Emma, because you started to talk about how you're dealing with people coming in and millennials who have different expectations. Moving on, that sort of broader social and moral agenda, has that changed the way your organisations had to operate or deal with people coming in, new people coming in?
I mean, in terms of the returning to the office piece, I mean, it's just exceptionally complicated, and we are really kind of going through a journey, as I think everybody is. I'm now calling it the inflexible, flexible working.
Well, that's a new one.
Because what we've done, absolutely, is we've really pushed it down. We've done exactly what we should have done. We've told teams that they can look at their roles, look at how it works for them, really think about how often do we need to be together, what activities will we be doing together. We really thought that we were going on the right path, and employees were really happy. What we're starting to find, though, is the employees now have a flexible working schedule which they have set. And now we're starting to come across these barriers where we're having a slowdown of important meetings because, well, I can't do a Tuesday because I don't do Tuesdays, and I don't do a Wednesday. And we're even having this with recruiting managers who are desperately trying to fill their jobs but could only do a face-to-face interview on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. because they don't come in on a Thursday. And I think
Right,
this is a
okay.
really interesting
That's
transition
interesting.
we're about to go through.
Yeah, interesting.
Because as businesses and organisations, we have really tried to get behind the flexible working. But of course, flexible working only works if everybody's flexible.
Yeah, exactly.
And at the moment, we have a situation where employees have an expectation of flexibility on their terms.
Yeah.
And again, we hear the tabloid press tell us it is the year of the resignation. I hasten to add, we've done a lot of data gathering in our organisation. We have no more resignations at the moment than we would normally expect at this time of year, with the exception of last year when we were in lockdown and people were too scared to move. But of course, the tabloid press tells us that it is the year of the resignation and all these jobs are available, so people have more choice. It tells us they should be able to have all of this flexibility, but they've forgotten about the need to be flexible to their employer as well as the employers need to be flexible to them. And actually, I think this is what's going to be the undoing of what I think is the right way forward, which is a hybrid working model. Because actually, some organisations are going to suddenly come across operational difficulties because of the inflexibility of staff who've demanded flexibility.
But that's about a conversation with you as an HR person, with each individual person. I mean, the psychological contract that Steve talked about, it should be this conversation. You and I are having a conversation, and I say to you, I don't want to come in all the time. I'd like to come in maybe a couple days a week. You then say to me, given the nature of your role, that's fine. And then I say to you, I'd want to make it Tuesday and Wednesday. You should then come back to me and say, that's not the way it works. The way it works is you are a part of a team, and your flexibility, two or 3 days, fine, that's okay. But let's work it so that because you're part of a team. So we're going to have to, you can't just say it's Tuesday and Wednesday, because that's inflexible in a way.
Yeah, well, as you said,
but the problem that we have
flexible.
is we have so many dual income households who have responsibilities outside of work which do not have flexibility. Yeah. So actually, for me to have one of my employees come in on a Wednesday, she needs a major negotiation with her husband, because her husband's agreement is that he goes in on a Wednesday and she doesn't go in on a Wednesday, and they've dropped all their childcare and thus saved the cost and the inconvenience. And suddenly they have agreed a new working pattern, which they're perceiving to be flexible working because it's a hybrid working pattern, but it's not flexible at all.
For the rest of the team, it's not flexible.
But
and I think this is going to be the unpicking.
Yeah, you're right.
There are three stakeholders in this triangle, and one of them often gets forgotten. I mean, you know, in our organisation, we've done exactly the same thing. We tried to be as accommodating to people's need for flexibility. And then we realised the other day that we've got one person who works on a Friday in one team. So if something happens or a client needs something, or, you know, it's her. And she's not prepared to do it. You know, she's saying the consequence of being so liberal and responsive is that we can't meet our operational requirements. And so actually this is about balancing the needs of an individual, of course, for flexibility, the business's need for flexibility, and the customer's need for flexibility. And sometimes the customer gets left out of all this because customers want to access services 24/7, you know, weekends and so on. So how do you get that sort of sweet spot right so that you sometimes it means saying no. And saying no is fair sometimes, because it just means you're not going to screw up your ability to meet customer needs just because you want to be overly responsive to your employee. So it's a balancing act and a negotiation, and you have to be really clear what the rules of engagement are.
But I think it is that this is the journey that we're on at the moment, because there is this kind of mix of putting in personal responsibilities and activities outside of work into this mix, which people simply weren't able to do before, is, I think, where we're going to really struggle.
What you're saying is that there's a fourth one, the outside, the family,
that's true.
Particularly for young people who have young children. So there's four people in this marriage.
Well, I did some work for PwC a few years ago, and we're looking at graduate entrants. And you know, there was a long list of things that they were expecting in their first job, and top of the list was work-life balance.
Yeah, exactly.
Top of the list. Yeah. And some, long in the tooth partners at PwC will say, well, let's do some work first to get the work-life balance. But you know, they'd heard that working in PwC and a similar organisation was tough. And so they were trying to get their defence in first.
Yeah.
You know, we're trying to protect themselves against what they knew was going to be sometimes intolerable pressure, and the pressure to be visible, pressure to deliver, you know, high quality work and work, you know, put a night shift in to meet a client's needs. They knew that was going to happen, but they were trying to protect themselves by, you know, making sure they were putting in a call for work-life balance early on.
I mean, I had a really difficult conversation with our Tokyo office the other day, because they had worked out that because they have very long commutes in Tokyo, they've worked out if they work from home, they can do an extra 5 hours a day because they do 2.5 hours each way commute. Yeah. So they had a wonderful idea that at certain times of the month they would work exceptionally long hours, which were the peak of the month. So you could argue as a business, that's a really great idea. We get more of them at the time of the month when we need them more. And then they would just take kind of other bits of the month off. And the reason why I was pushing back quite hard is because I was saying, well, when are you going to have your thinking time? When are you going to have your headspace? When are you going to have your development time? Because at the moment, in those lows of the month, that's when we're investing in your development, your progression, and you're thinking a little bit more strategically, and you've got some space. Whereas they were just thinking about, well, today I can do a lot of hours at this time of the month, and I just won't work the rest of the month. And I had a real concern about the impact on their development, because they were just removing what they consider to be empty time, but it's probably the time when they have all of their ideas and their creativity and they collaborate with other teams, and they were just looking to kind of erase it to get what they perceive to be a work-life balance. Yes.
But you raised the issue, and that's the important thing. You raised the issue with them.
Hasn't made me popular.
That's what human resource management should be about, rather than personnel. We're in HR. If HR is HR, I'm afraid, guys and gals, as HR people, you got a lot of work on now. You know, it's not, this negotiation process is not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult.
It is really tough.
But you have to be honest. And from your perspective, you say, I'm representing the employer. And I think here's the downside of what you just said. You have to be honest about that. And that's how you get the negotiation sorted.
One of the best ways of doing it, is self-managed teams. And we should bring all the stuff from years ago, the coal mine plant in Volvo and stuff like that. Teams themselves should be accountable for knowing what their delivery is and work out their schedules to meet their delivery.
Yeah. By the way, that's not a bad idea.
I'll disagree with Cary. Asking the HR director to sit there and pull all the levers is not the way to do it.
Oh, no, I agree with your self-managing teams. I like that idea.
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
But it's great if you've got great managers.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. It's a great manager.
So you essentially find that you're filling in for those managers that don't have the EQ or don't have the experience?
You do, or sometimes you're filling it. What you tend to find is the really good, strong managers end up managing their teams in a way that the teams perceive as less fair than the weaker manager, who actually is just going for the easy ride. So you end up in a situation where sometimes the engagement levels of the stronger managers can drop, because they feel as though in the short term, maybe not the long term, they feel in the short term as though they're not being given the same flexibility, because the weaker managers just aren't managing it.
Let's just get back to work.
We have one last question, and then I think we are up on time. So go on, make it a good one, Martin.
No pressure then. Pre-pandemic, organisations looked at culture as being, it was a buzzword and it's been going around for a long time, and this is what it means to be working with us, and links into discretionary effort as well, and leadership development, all that sort of good stuff. There's been a noticeable shift in listening to this as well, with where we are now and where we're going, that culture's been given a real shake-up in organisations. And when you look at people coming into an organisation, and I'll take myself for an example, when I started right at the beginning of the pandemic here, I hadn't met anyone. So my culture, my understanding of Armstrong Craven was my own little bubble, for instance. So how impactful is that change in culture and contracting with your employees? How is that changing, and where do we need to be going with culture within organisations?
I think it's partly about meaning and purpose. I think, and I know a lot of people talk about that, and with a degree of cynicism. I did see an organisation that was recruiting a chief meaning officer, for example, which is just one step down from a laughter manager, which I've also seen.
Chief happiness officer.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff. So quite a few of those. But I think, particularly in knowledge-based organisations, where your competitive advantage is based on your ability to curate and get knowledge and know-how and so on. I think, it is partly to do with culture and values and so on. But I think the thing that binds, you've got to identify the thing that binds people together and gives them that sense of collective purpose. I agree with the idea about self-managed teams. I think that's exactly the opposite to the sort of hero model of leadership that we've been reliant on too much, and perhaps is too much prevalent in the sporting world. So I think there is something about finding what that irreducible core of purpose of your organisation is, that gives people, that animates people to give discretionary effort. That is an articulation of what we're all here to do. We've all got our tasks and our deadlines and so on, but above all that is some sense that we're all here to make this difference in the world. And that doesn't need to necessarily be a highfalutin thing. It's about, the thing that binds you all together to get you up every day and to make sure that you are giving of your best the whole time. And that should be automatic. To be part of this organisation, you get it in companies like Microsoft, because as soon as you walk through the door, there's a sort of way of doing things and a way of being that is acceptable, and which goes way above, the sort of articles of association or your business purpose. It's something that binds you as individuals together. And I think that's the future of this, that goes beyond, sort of fairly trite definitions of what culture might be.
I think that is a very good place to end. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. And that's it. Please feel free to take your copies of Stephen and Cary's book with you, because otherwise they will take them all and resell them. Yeah, thank you all for coming, and hopefully we'll see you all again at another event soon. Thank you. Thank you. Right, it's coming.